Hey there everybody, Manic here. If you've watched any of my videos, you've probably heard me say that I've been playing Monster Hunter games, essentially since the launch in the West. I still have my original copy of Monster Hunter for PS2, and my memory card with over 10,000 hours. Somewhere at least. I'm mentioning this to make clear that I'm very aware of how difficult the original games are, and I wouldn't have played them that much otherwise. The original and every game after hold a very special place in my heart, and I fully expect Monster Hunter Dose to do the same. If you're a little lost, Monster Hunter Dose is a game in the series that never saw a release here in the West, but thanks to the Breakarts team and their English patch, we can all enjoy it to the fullest extent. I've been having a ton of fun with the game, and as of this recording, have 25 hours locked in, and am trying to get more done alongside continuing my studies in game design. My schoolwork and studies being one of the main reasons my uploads can be a little all over the place. I've cleared almost everything up to the Kushala Daora hunt in the Snowy Mountains, and plan to take him down very soon. I also have some subspecies to take down as well, and a fish that I'm particularly annoyed with that isn't popping up in my rotation of quests. All of that aside though, let's get to the start of my journey in Monster Hunter Dose. So to clarify, there are some things I was already aware of going into this journey into Dose. The season changes, day and night cycle, and a more robust village atmosphere were all things I knew about ahead of time. I figured out quickly about the herbs that were attainable at each time of the day, and quickly became very annoyed with the mechanic, but we'll go into that more later. Don't get me wrong, I have no issues with the gathering mechanics in these games. What I hate about it in Dose in particular, though, is that early on you have no way of getting your hands on these items outside of the quests. That means a lot of spamming the one gathering quest in the jungle for materials if you want to solely focus on gathering with little monster interaction. Obviously that's kind of the point, but early on there is nothing to offset this method aside from spending money to skip to daytime or waiting. You can only gather them during the daytime quests as well as gather as much honey and blue mushrooms as you are able. I found myself almost exclusively questing during the day so I could stock up on the day herbs early on. I still ran out quickly as I was readjusting to the old systems and trying the longsword. The season system in the game is interesting at first and keeps it that way for a time, though it does quickly wear off as I started to consider it more of a hindrance since it felt like it forced me to do hunting and gathering in certain ways. Pairing that with cutting you off from honey almost entirely during the cold weather, it can get brutal rather quickly. A very large majority of my first few hours in the game came down to gathering, like it usually does in most Monster Hunter games. Day herbs, blue mushrooms, honey, bones, ore, and for me at least, Kelby horns for selling were very key items that I focused on, setting me up for some early upgrades as well as decent chunks of money for set upgrades. I feel I should also mention the village itself before we go into the hunting sections of this video though. Jumbo Village is a welcoming hometown for us to start in. Looking at it as a sequel to Monster Hunter 1, I feel it expands more on Kokoto in quite a few ways. Kokoto Village had a similar small town setting, being welcomed in as a village hunter, and given a room to sleep in while we're in town before hunts. Jumbo also does this, as a bit livelier when we compare the two. I'm glad to see that we have more movement and interaction with each villager in Jumbo, showing that they learned a bit from Kokoto and wanted to make things feel more lived in. Comparatively, Kokoto only had 1 or 2 villagers that roamed, while in Jumbo there's many that roam all over the place. The villagers there also didn't have much story, while Jumbo fixes some of this by giving the characters we'll be interacting with more personality and vibrancy. The blacksmith is a small Wyverian woman that has some very fun dialogue. Both of our merchants, the feline and the combiner, are interesting and have bits of dialogue that stand out more when comparing them to the past merchant in Kokoto. The village chief of Jumbo, a seemingly very excitable Wyverian that is set on helping the village thrive while bouncing all over the village helping others. I'd also argue it can be a little annoying looking for him sometimes when he's all over the place like that, but for the most part it doesn't cause too many issues. I feel he's also a great contrast to the Elder of Kokoto, where Jumbo's chief has an energetic attitude and shows he's nervous but feels more capable with us in the village helping, while Kokoto's Elder is very wise and has many stories to tell of his past days as a hunter. Each villager also can have requests pop up that they would like completed, be it quests or delivering items. It seems to advance quest lines for the village as well, but I'm not entirely sure on that one. My only complaint about this is that when it comes to deliveries at least, the rewards don't really feel worth the effort at times. At most I would receive maybe 300 zenny, and occasionally ore rewards from the blacksmith's requests. And that's possibly due to where I currently am in Dose, but at the same time, such a small amount doesn't really incentivize me to go out of my way to do them. And finally, to close out the topic of Jumbo, we'll go over the meals in the home. Don't get me wrong, meals in Monster Hunter games are very important, but I've actively ignored the food system in the Dose. I tried things out the first few times and quickly became annoyed when I continually mainly got negative effects. I could look up what the best ingredients are, but I'd honestly rather just play the game and have fun with a bit more of a challenge. Granted, I've only tried a few times with different combinations of food stuff, but those few times quickly made me decide to ignore the systems in place. To me, it wasn't worth continuing to try when I can complete quests without eating just as easily, especially since it only really gave minor health increases, but usually decreased my max stamina. I'd also prefer not to have my max health decrease since monsters hit much harder in these older games, and that can just cause me to be punished much easier. Thankfully, over time, the food systems have been improved for the better, but I can appreciate the dev team of Monster Hunter as they always try new things and always expand to make mechanics better in the future games. Now finally, let's go ahead and jump into the hunts. The first thing I will mention regarding hunting is that the jungle is no joke for a starting area. The Hermitars, Bolfongo, Velociprey, and Vespoids are all the main problems here. The first two being beefier targets, while the Velociprey and Vespoids tend to be in packs. Vespoids are also present in almost every zone of the map, and after some farming, I quickly made a greatsword, which is my go-to weapon for the older games. I'll go ahead and apologize if I happen to grab terrible gameplay for the video. I decided it was time to take on an old friend, the Velocidrome. The raptor-like monster likes to pounce and bite at us, but that's really all he has in his moveset category. He does tend to have a group of Velociprey in most areas with him, but he went down easy enough, even without armor. Before continuing my hunt, I decided to focus my attention on making a particular set that was an investment, the Battle Armor set. A very early set that gives attack boost for that extra bit of damage. Took some rare materials, but was worth it in the end, gave us some pretty good defense as well. I finished hunting the Velocidrome a second time, and it got me enough money to make 3 pieces of the set. Once I was secured, I went ahead and took on the nasty Bulldrome. Man, I do not miss hunting the Bulldrome, especially with its limited moveset. Charging is the name of the game, and when it's raging, it's practically all insta-charges. Instant charges being ones that have little to no animation to tell that the creature is going for it. He does have a weird attack where he kind of flails around and turns in 180 degrees occasionally, but he doesn't use it very often. So other than being a really beefy, struggling nuisance, pretty easy. After that, I decided to go ahead and finish making the battle armor to get that juicy attack up small to make hunts a little faster. And once that was finished, we moved on to the desert as our second map of the game to hunt for a Gendrome, the paralytic cousin of the Velocidrome. Now, I don't know what made this hunt such a nightmare for me. Gendrome is very similar to Velocidrome. He has a lot of the same attacks, tends to have his pack with him as well, so you wouldn't think it would be too difficult, but that paralytic factor plays into the game. That Gendrome also had it out for me though, and did not care for my armor in the slightest. That Gendrome hit so hard with a standard bite attack that when I was hit with it, I had to heal almost after every attack. It was the first hunt that I think I ran fully out of healing. I don't recall being paralyzed by it in the first encounter, but I do recall being pretty shocked. Still, we overcame that objective, hunted it again for a request I believe, and then finished out our first day of Monster Hunter Dose. Day 2 started strong after some farming. We made the Bone Katana to try out against another old friend, the Yankutku. There is a reason that many players call this monster a wall for newer players. I can also say for a fact the newer games have made me a little weak. I remember the glory days of my prime being able to take these monsters down with little to no hits, rolling through roars, and beating them down bit by bit over time. Going back to the older games, it's shown me that I've gotten pretty soft compared to back then. That's not to say it's a bad thing, but the newer games are still amazing. To me though, it shows that the games have definitely changed and grown over so much time. Every movement used to be planned and precise to make sure we had enough time to react accordingly to the monsters. It's still there to an extent in the newer titles, but I don't believe it's to the same level as the older games. In a way, it's a good thing, but part of me does miss it. Back to Cuckoo. This bird wyvern is nasty for a beginner. He charges awkwardly, one can be after a slow turn, and another can be somewhat instant. He lobs fireballs that have a deceptively large hitbox, and he will lob them in one of his charges in a side-to-side motion. His beak pecks aren't too dangerous, but if he lunges beforehand, be a little careful. He does a classic tail whip as well, which, ironically, if the creature is a bit large, can go right over your head and the hitbox will miss. Or he can be small enough and it feels like your rolls never make it through due to lingering hitboxes. The worst thing in the Cuckoo's arsenal, however, is the chip damage. Nowadays, we don't have to worry about this too much, but in the older games, monsters had a mean hitbox when they were turning or stomping in place. They dealt chip damage to you, and it added up extremely quickly if you didn't notice it fast enough. Cuckoo being one of the worst offenders too. Overall though, Cuckoo's fight isn't too bad. If you are careful and focus on the head of the creature as much as possible, you'll make it out in no time. A newer player may also notice that Cuckoo's ears fold down after a long time of damaging it. That's because he has one of the earliest tells in the game, being that a Cuckoo's ears will fold down when it is low enough to capture. Once we took him down, a breath of relief came out, and I knew it was in the clear for a little longer, and finished day 2 with a Gendrome hunt after the Cuckoo. I want to take a longer moment to talk about old gen mechanics and some new ones in DOS. To preface this, I do love the old gen Monster Hunter games, even with all of what I would consider to be their flaws. In the first 2 generations of games, possibly the third as well, but I'm not entirely sure on that, so don't quote me on it. The monsters are all programmed so that you are the focus. The biggest problem with this is that if a monster you are hunting happens to hit something passive like a feline, all of the feline and melings in the area will now aggro straight to you. Mosswine are also another example of this. The other problem is that in older games, a large monster can be in any area with many small monsters. Now, if it makes sense, for example, a Velocidrome with a pack of Velociprey, that's an entirely different story. But if the Cuckoo I'm hunting happens to go into an area with 4 to 5 Velociprey, and they are all aggro to me, in my opinion, that can be bad design. It's likely done this way in the older games to give a challenge, and possibly even because they may not have known a better way to program the monsters. I feel games later in the series address this better. These raptors would likely run away or run off to a different section of the map, while the large monster is there kind of hiding away from the fight. They also have them programmed in these later games that the smaller monsters would pounce on and attack the large monster if he gets knocked down by us, taking advantage of its weakness. Now, should they do the same when the large monster knocks you down? Maybe, but not necessarily, since the creature they see as a major threat is still standing and could take them out fairly easily. I don't want to knock on the older games for this though. They are early attempts at making these games. It was quite literally a learning process for them. But that doesn't keep the older games from being a mind-numbing mess at times with how full these zones are, especially if there are multiple Belfongo. I refer to these instances as monster closets, which, in my opinion, don't really work for a Monster Hunter game. Monster closets are more popular in games like Doom, where we can effectively and quickly mow down all the enemies in said closet. The worst offender of monster closets in modern day would be Dark Souls 2, and let's not get me started on that train wreck, please. I'd also like to address the crafting system in DOS. Weapons are still standard, gather materials needed and craft. Armor is much the same, but expanded from the first game. The devs made it so you could upgrade armor like weapons. Needed materials could increase the defense stat of the piece of armor, and if upgraded repeatedly could add slots to the pieces that didn't have any. As far as I am in the game, that is. Much later, I also found that once a piece of armor was upgraded enough, it could then be upgraded on separate paths, one continuing the original set, but increasing the defense stat much higher, and it also looked like it lost the slots, possibly, while the other seems to upgrade using parts from the subspecies of the monsters, and having slightly different skills. I do find this very interesting and much more in-depth than our current system of armor spheres, although I'm unsure how to feel about it overall though, and I would likely revisit the idea in a later video after I've played the game a bit more. Going back to the discussion with the day and night cycle and seasons now, at this point in my time with DOS, I feel these systems are in the game to immerse yourself into the world, but by the point in time where you feel you should be advancing, it feels like taking too many steps back to restock. It forces you to either hunt a particular easy monster or go back and gather. You better be doing it during the day and during the warm or breeding season as well, or you aren't getting honey, which is needed for your mega potions. It's a frustrating mess, which at this point in the game, I'm glad I can ignore. I already spend time gathering honey every hunt, and if I want blue mushrooms, I can go for them as well. We'll cover it later, but at a certain point in the game, I completed a quest, and the granny merchant starts showing up randomly. The moment she showed up, and I saw she sold the day herbs, I bought about 200 of them to keep from wasting my time farming them. Some may say it breaks immersion. I would say it breaks my immersion that I've shown my renown as a hunter and am still not allowed to buy potions at that point, or any healing type items at all for a matter of fact. I don't want to attack or knock DOS too much for this, though as an idea and gameplay aspect it works, and for the time it makes sense that they experimented in this way, but I feel that over time they have taken this idea and sculpted it into a better system overall. I feel the seasons mechanic works much better in an expedition style hunt like Moga Woods and Moga Village in Tri and 3U, and I would absolutely love to see a system like that come back with multiple maps, similar to how it is in Iceborne and Sunbreak with the shifting environments and upsurges of resources. Getting materials for trading to the Argosy was also an interesting system, but I am not a fan of a particular random item showing up, and would much prefer to have just an entire list that gets added to as you get certain items for, say, trading and more rare items. The bounty board system in DOS is also something I feel I should mention. Essentially, it's just a board that shows you how much you would be getting for hunting the monsters. It fluctuates and can be very high at times and very low at times. I did a hunt for a Boldrum once while grinding, and it had a whopping 2,000 zenny as a bonus reward. The downside is that it did increase how much money I had to put down as a quest fee, but in the end the bonus was well worth it. It's an interesting system, and I'd be open for ideas on how it could be implemented in newer games, but I don't feel it would quite be necessary since there are so many different ways to make money in newer generations. I should also mention that even though all of this, I haven't had too many times where I've been struggling for money. With how often I would have to stop my forward progression to restock potion materials, I didn't feel like I ran low on funds very often. I even got to a point where I had plenty of Velocidrome parts, since it was a quick, easy hunt with a decent reward, and I could sell the excess parts for money. I'd sell other materials occasionally as well, but only when I had an excess of them and knew I did not need them in the future. DOS also has a merchant that will do combinations at a 100% combo rate. You must complete a combo at least once, and then from there on, he can do them for you for a small fee. He also sells the combo books of old. It's appreciated that it's here since success rate is a nightmare for some items, but I don't see them ever going back to the old system for combos since it was pretty frustrating to get garbage at random, especially since combo books were fairly expensive and you had to have them in your inventory to gain the benefit. Day 3 of DOS is one I wish I could ignore. Thankfully, Cephadrome's AI seemed to have been improved a bit from Monster Hunter 1, and it didn't spend all its time going in triangles. Sandblasts, diving out of the sand to glide through the air, hip checks, and tail spins are the main attacks. It also surprisingly wasn't as beefy as I remembered, and went down fairly easily. The next hunt, though, was quite a doozy. The Daimyo Hermitar. This hunt was brutal, but an absolute blast. I had forgotten how enjoyable the old crabs were. Granted, I was frustrated with how much damage I was taking, but we can see both sides here. The worst part of the hunt was when we were in areas where there were also Apsaros present. Apsaros are one of the most annoying monsters in the early game, simply because of how much health they have and how much space they take up. They easily were the most frustrating part of the hunt. This is the hunt that finally unlocked the granny that I had mentioned previously, and the fact that she was selling the day herbs was a blessing in disguise. I had also noticed now watching back my footage that the merchant that combines items sold blue mushrooms at this point, so it's a win-win all around. After using about a fifth of my funds to buy 200 or so of the day herbs, I was finally feeling in a better place. I then proceeded to my next map, the swamp, going on a simple hunt for the Iodrome. I ran around gathering ore mainly, and then headed my way to fight the poisonous creature, only to find out that his bites hurt even worse than the Gendrum sometimes. Thankfully, the poison doesn't last too long if you get hit by it, so just be careful not to take too much damage. After taking out the overgrown lizard, I then proceeded to hunt one more and look over some interesting upgrades for my future. I continued to farm after this video went up, and made the Ioprey sword and shield. From there, I then began a quest in the swamp that had a sub-quest of defeating Hornitar. I needed a ton of wings and heads from these creatures for the upgrade, and had to do a couple quests to complete the part of that upgrade. I also had to rely on the Veggie Elder to randomly give me either an armor seed or an armor skin, so I could use those as well to upgrade the bone longsword I had to the Black Katana Mark II. It had a whopping 576 raw with green sharpness, a bonus +2 to defense, and 2 slots. This weapon alone is insane for this early in the game. I also made plans to make the Barbaroid blade when I gathered enough materials, being a great sword with 624 raw, 200 fire damage, 18 defense, and a huge chunk of yellow sharpness. These two weapons are what I'm currently using as well, and at this point we finish day 3 and prepare for the most frustrated I've been in quite a while with the old games. Day 4 is where my breaking point started. Mainly because to start this day, I had decided to hunt a blue yen kutku, a subspecies of the creature. I spent the first 18 minutes of the hunt trying to find the monster. Let's just take a quick moment to appreciate the 5th gen games. I don't recall the blimp being in the level. If it was, the worst part is that I had no idea how to do the gesture. By the time I had figured it out, it was already too late and I was exhausted. It was my longest hunt by far, simply due to old mechanics and not knowing that my gesture menu was hidden in the chat bar menu that gets brought up when the top face button is pushed, triangle or Y respectively. Blue Kutku itself doesn't really do anything else different from regular Kutku, other than being much faster than the original, and when it gets enraged, it's even faster. I feel this is a good moment to mention the tracking in the older games. Paintballs are the way we track monsters in the older games. You also have the blimp, which gives 1 free spotting of the monster when you wave at them. Other than that, you are on your own, and it comes down to your knowledge of the monster and what areas it tends to frequent. After you've hunted a monster enough, these things start to become apparent to you, but the biggest issue is that the monsters in the older games will leave areas so quickly when you are moving around the map. It quickly becomes a game of tag, where you basically have to hope that you stumble upon the monster in the area you know it frequents and cycle through, sometimes doubling back as well. Many people would say this is ridiculous and a waste of time. That's not to say the system is bad, but it is definitely archaic, and they have learned over time ways to improve tracking. I, for one, am a huge fan of how tracking is in World and Iceborne. Landing in the map and following tracks is a great way of immersing us into the hunting aspect of Monster Hunter. My biggest complaint about it, though, is the scout flies. They wouldn't be that bad if they didn't yank your camera in a direction, and some players complain about them being too prominent as well. which to an extent I can definitely agree, and that's definitely a personal opinion. But this could be solved by toning down the effects of them, or giving us the option to tone down the effects, and making it to where they only highlight tracks or gatherable materials when you're within a couple feet of them instead of pretty far away like they did. The hunter notes being expanded to show the details as we learn about the monsters from gathering tracks, and hunting is a perfect touch as well. We as hunters would learn more about the creature the more we hunt it, obviously. And I feel they reflect that well with the level system and added charts of weaknesses and strengths. It's also an infinitely better tracking system than Rise Sunbreak, which is drop in and your owl shows you the location of the monsters on the map, and you just run over there and find the correct monster you're looking for. Granted, that's, at least in my perspective, because Sunbreak and Rise is more arcade-like, which I'll definitely cover in a video later on. To detox a little, we then decided to hunt the funny pink monkey Kangalala. The fight itself isn't very hard, mainly avoid his swings until he flops, then wail on him accordingly. He'll do 3 swipes and fall on the 3rd, causing a tremor if you're too close. Charges at you occasionally, flops into the air onto the ground, and finally, he will fart on you. The worst part of this humiliation is that it will keep you from being able to heal unless you have deodorant. I did enjoy fighting him again, and I hope we see him in the future. Ironically, the only thing that really made the fight challenging was dealing with the conga that were also present. Those boys are also very beefy and can take a while to take down. I then decided to take on the rubber chicken, Gypsyros. Gypsyros is weird. His skin is tough and will cause you to bounce off him often. He charges goofily, lobbing poison like Koo in his fireballs. He has the same chip damage if you're standing by his feet. Tail spins as well, with a bit more reach on his tail. He can also steal items if he hits you with his pecking attack, if I recall correctly. And the crest on his head also allows the Gypsyros to cause a blinding flash like a flash bomb that stuns you if you're too close. You can roll through, dive away to avoid it, or simply get out of range. Finally, he will also play dead. Be extremely careful at this moment. If you are too close, the flailing attack he does can literally one-shot you if you don't have enough defense at this point in the game. Other than that, Gypsyros is just mean, fast, and poisonous. Aim for the head as much as you can, and the tail as well since it's a weak spot. After that, we finish day 4 off with a final cut Koo hunt in preparation for a big showdown. The Steel Dragon, Kushala Daora. It was finally time. We had finally finished our longsword to repel the Elder Dragon from the jungle. We made a few pieces of cut Koo armor to replace our battle armor to get a stronger attack boost, as well as increased defense stats after upgrading as much as we could. We were as ready as we could ever be. I'm not gonna lie to you, I've never been good at fighting Kushala. Old Kushala wind pressure is something else, and he really doesn't give us any chances. We unfortunately got knocked into the air from his sweeping winds, then slammed into the ground to cart us the first time. We do try to continue fighting, but it's just no use. I can't seem to find the openings I need with the longsword. I even learned something I had no clue from a comment on the video, that the status buildup degrades over time, and if it isn't dealt with quick enough, a poison status with the throwing knives won't happen. I learn something new almost every time I replay these older games, so it's no surprise to me I'd learned something from my first time in DOS. We end up failing the quest. So I decided I would quit to the main menu and pretend it didn't happen to save resources. We'd also try a more tried and true approach for me. We would bring out our newly acquired Barboy Blade, the powerful greatsword that I had mentioned previously. This time, we were ready. I was not expecting the hunt to only take a couple minutes, even if it was only a repel quest. However, this isn't the end. We still must chase down the Kushala into the desert to repel it again. We get more of a showing of Kushala's attacks in this quest since it is longer. Kushala Daora controls the very winds. letting out blasts from its mouth that deal a ton of damage and can also stagger you if you are just barely outside of the damage hitbox. It charges fairly often and also has some simple claw swipes. The kicker for Kushala though is that he spends quite a bit of time airborne. He can let loose a torrent of wind that he will sweep from side to side as he moves forward, let out a massive blast towards the ground, slam his front claws into the ground at you, and tops it off with a little tail flick that still hurts a lot. One of the biggest things Kushala has though is its wind barrier. It's constant barrier that will push you away from Kushala if you get too close, so knowing your spacing is important. Poisoning Kushala will actually disable the barrier for the duration, so bringing either a weapon or the poison throwing knives will help a ton. Flash bombs will also be your best friend here to get him out of the sky. Beating his head over and over will eventually net you the win. I went for this since I figured part breaks might be asking a bit much. After all I've been through so far in DOS, I can say without a doubt that I have had an immense amount of fun. Going back to older games is always a blast for me, even if it means dealing with older archaic systems. I'm going to continue my playthrough of DOS. There are a couple videos up that weren't covered in this part, but will be once I get to a spot where I would consider it the next step up for a summary for how far I've gotten. I don't normally ask for viewers to like and subscribe because I like to focus more on gameplay, providing entertainment, and just having fun. But with this being my first big step in writing a script and taking the extra time to try and edit a video together for a summarized experience, I would greatly appreciate if you would like the video and maybe consider subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to hear any feedback from you guys as well, be it general conversation, advice, or even if you just want to shit talk me and call me bad at the game. I genuinely just like to have fun and wanted to share this experience with others and encourage those that are worried about trying out the older Monster Hunter games. They are difficult, but they will fill you with such an amazing feeling of accomplishment for overcoming the hardships and just getting used to everything. Regardless, hopefully you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one, hopefully. Laters.